Radio from ships floating off the British coast, changing the way we listen to music. The most famous was Radio Caroline, which began broadcasting 30 years ago. Tomorrow would have been its birthday, and to mark the occasion, it's returning to the airwaves just for the day.
To celebrate the anniversary today, Radio Caroline was on the air again, but this time perfectly legally. Studios which once defied the British government were hooked up to a local radio station's transmitters. Among the hundreds of former listeners who paid £10 a head to visit the Ross Revenge off the Essex coast was the man who started it all. 3 decades ago, Ronan O'Rahilly, then a 22-year-old pop promoter, hit on the idea of beaming signals from just outside coastal waters to a pop-starved Britain.
It's hard to imagine, but in those days you had something like, I think, an hour of pop music a week. On a Saturday afternoon, if I remember, with Alan Freeman. I mean, that was it. And so when suddenly it was 24 hours a day, it was pretty wild. I mean, and it was just like a forest fire. I mean, just every set who was interested in listening to music turned onto it.
You're listening to Radio Caroline, broadcasting from the Ross Revenge on the North Sea.
In its time, Caroline had to weather legislation, arrest, shipwreck, and the constant risk of storms.
You tended to toss and turn, pitch and roll, so you were all over the show. And the only thing that was stabilised was not our stomachs, but in fact the turntables in which we had to play good old vinyl in those days, long before CDs.
And it remains a constant battle to stay afloat. This, the 5th boat to bear the name, was only saved from the scrapyard by subscriptions from fans who wouldn't let the music die. There are plenty who've made a virtual pilgrimage here to the windswept Essex coast today who would like Radio Caroline to return to those anarchic, unregulated days and power up these transmitters once more. If they did, though, the government now would be able to silence them at gunpoint.
The law has been drafted so that the government can send their armed forces out beyond their own territorial limits, specifically to raid Radio Caroline.
The station will never have the 22 million listeners it once boasted, but it may be heard again. The plans to raise enough money to make the vessel seaworthy and sail her around maritime festivals as a floating broadcasting museum. The boat that changed radio forever, remaining true to the first record played, they won't fade away either. Jeff Mead, Sky News, aboard Radio Caroline.